In the heart of Louisiana, where the swamps hold more secrets than the people who walk among them, there once stood a university unlike any other. Its grand gates bore no name, its walls seemed older than the town that surrounded it, and its enrollment followed a rule so strange, so binding, that it carved a reputation darker than the bayous themselves. Every year, only a single family was admitted. Not a single student, not a group of applicants, an entire family, chosen without explanation, summoned as though the institution itself extended the invitation. And yet, what began as an honor soon became a curse. For none who ever entered those gates returned to graduate. Some vanished entirely, their names swallowed by silence. Others left traces so faint that the locals whispered their stories only in hushed voices, never daring to speak of them under the full moon. The halls of that university were said to shift with the seasons, rooms opening and closing as if they obeyed an intelligence of their own. Professors arrived who were not seen entering the town, and books appeared in the library written in scripts no one claimed to understand. The few who dared to trespass at night swore they heard the faint recitations of lessons not meant for human ears, the echoes of lectures delivered by voices that carried no breath. Tonight, on the Withered Ledger, we unfold the story of that university. A story bound to the families who were chosen, bound to the soil of Louisiana, and bound to a mystery that lingers like a curse through generations. But the question remains, why was only one family chosen each year, and what truly became of them once the gates closed behind them? The invitation that could not be refused. The year was 1859, and Louisiana was already a land steeped in old wounds and older whispers. The Civil War had not yet broken open its arteries, but tension lay thick in the air, mingling with the swamp's damp breath. Families held on to secrets as tightly as they clutched their land, and religion served more often as a shield than salvation. Yet, even in a region saturated with ghost tales and superstitions, there was one story that exceeded the rest. It began, as most curses do, with something that appeared deceptively ordinary. The Leclerc family were not remarkable by any measure. They were modest landowners, French Creoles who tilled their cane fields and maintained their home on the edge of St. Landry Parish. They attended Mass with the rest of the town, paid their taxes, and lived without drawing much attention. The father, Henri Leclerc, was a man hardened by labor but softened by his devotion to his wife, Cécile, and their 2 children. Their lives were small, but they were content. Until the letter arrived. It was a Sunday morning when it appeared, though no one could say how. The family had returned from church, the air thick with the scent of magnolia and the weight of summer heat. On the wooden table in their front hall lay an envelope. Its paper was heavy, as though pressed from a pulp foreign to Louisiana. The seal was red, not wax but something darker, glistening faintly as if still wet. Henri swore he had locked the door when they left for Massachusetts. Cécile, pale and trembling, insisted no rider had come up the road. And yet the letter lay there, addressed in curling script. To the house of Leclerc. Henri broke the seal with the same unease one reserves for opening a coffin. Inside was a parchment, written in impeccable ink strokes that seemed too steady to have been guided by a human hand. The words read, "By decree of the university, your family is hereby summoned to enroll in the forthcoming term. Attendance is compulsory. The honor is yours alone. Prepare to depart by the first full moon of the season. The carriage will arrive at dusk." There was no signature. Only a crest at the bottom, an emblem depicting an open book, its pages blank, circled by a serpent devouring its own tail. The family stared in silence. Henri, though skeptical by nature, could not ignore the chill that crept across his skin as he touched the parchment. It felt too cold for the heat of August, as if drawn from some shadowed place. Cécile whispered a prayer under her breath, clutching her rosary, while their son, Lucien, only 16, leaned in with a strange fascination, as though the words had awakened some hunger inside him. Their youngest, Marie, no more than 11, pressed her face into her mother's skirts, whispering that she did not like the serpent on the page. By nightfall, the town already knew. In places like St. Landry Parish, news traveled faster than the river itself. Neighbors came to offer congratulations and condolences in equal measure, for everyone knew the stories. Each year, For as long as anyone could remember, one family was chosen. Not invited, not asked, chosen. The Carraways the year before. The Duvalier the year before them. And always the same outcome: they left, and they did not return. Some claimed they had seen the families in the distance afterward, standing at the windows of the university, pale and still as statues. Others swore the names of the chosen slowly disappeared from the church records, as if they had never lived in Louisiana at all. Yet, no priest, no mayor, no official had ever been able to explain the letters, the selection, or the vanishing. Henri tried to resist. He stormed into the mayor's office, demanding answers. But the mayor, a weary man with watery eyes, only shook his head and muttered that refusal had never been an option. "The carriage comes whether you prepare or not," he said softly, as if reciting an old prayer. "And it always leaves with what it came for." Cecile begged Henri to take the children and flee, to hide in New Orleans, or perhaps across the waters. But deep down, they both knew escape was a lie. There were stories of families who had tried. One family, the Fontenaux, had burned their invitation in front of the entire town. 3 nights later, their house was found empty, doors locked from the inside, dinner still steaming on the table, and no sign of the Fontenaux anywhere. By the following morning, the invitation had reappeared in the church, resting on the altar where the priest swore he had placed nothing. And so, the Leclercs waited. As the full moon approached, their days blurred into rituals of dread. Henri sharpened his tools with pointless determination, as though preparing for some invisible battle. Cecile lit candles at every window, though she could not say whom she hoped to ward off. Lucien walked the cane fields late into the night, whispering to himself, his eyes burning with an excitement that unsettled even his father. Marie cried often, her small voice carrying through the wooden house like a hymn for the doomed. Then, on the appointed evening, the carriage arrived. It rolled down the dirt road without the sound of hooves or wheels. The horses were blacker than night, their eyes glinting like polished glass. The driver was faceless beneath his wide-brimmed hat, his posture stiff as though he were carved from stone. He did not speak, did not gesture. He simply waited, as though he had always been there. The family packed as they had been instructed. Or rather, they did not pack at all. The letter had said nothing of belongings, and those who had left before them had carried only themselves. Henri lifted Marie into the carriage, though she clung to him with a desperation that tore at his heart. Cecile's hands shook so violently she could hardly step inside, but Lucien climbed in eagerly. His lips curved into a half-smile that his father could not bear to look at. As Henri himself entered, he glanced back once at their home. The crooked shutters, the fields bathed in silver moonlight, the life they had built through sweat and soil. He felt an ache in his chest as he realized he would never see it again. The carriage door shut without touch. The horses moved forward without whip or command. And as the road carried them away, Henri swore the fields themselves bent in unnatural shapes, as though bowing to something far older and far more merciless than man. The journey was silent. No wind, no insects, no sound but the creak of wood and the low, unnatural rhythm of hooves striking earth. Through the carriage window, the family glimpsed landscapes that seemed familiar but distorted, trees leaning at impossible angles, rivers flowing against their current, and shadows that moved as though they possessed thoughts of their own. Hours later, or perhaps days, for time lost its meaning, they reached the gates. The university stood before them, colossal and nameless. Its iron gates stretched higher than any cathedral spire, twisting into shapes that no blacksmith could have forged. Beyond them rose towers without windows, their stonework older than the colony, older perhaps than Louisiana itself. Some parts gleamed with new polish, while others crumbled into ruin, as though the building was being built and destroyed in the same breath. The gates opened without a sound. The faceless driver lifted his hand, pointing toward the yawning mouth of the campus. The Leclercs stepped out, one by one, the air heavy with a silence that seemed to press against their very bones. The gates closed behind them. And in that moment, the Leclerc family understood the truth whispered in every corner of Louisiana. An invitation to the university was not an honor. It was a sentence. The gates that closed themselves. The Leclercs had no time to turn back. The iron gates had sealed with a groan that reverberated through the earth, though no hand had touched them. The sound was less like metal closing and more like stone grinding over bone. It did not feel like the gates were locking something out. It felt like they were locking something in. Henri turned sharply, his hand pressed against the bars. Cold bit into his skin as if the iron itself was alive. "We will not stay," he whispered to Cecile, his voice breaking. But before he could rattle them, the bars shifted, shrinking, interlacing tighter until they resembled a wall more than a gate. The world beyond disappeared into a blur of mist, as though Louisiana itself had vanished the moment they entered. Lucien, standing just beyond his father, smiled faintly. "It wanted us here," he murmured. The words carried no fear, only a strange, feverish delight. Cecile pulled Marie close, whispering prayers against the girl's ear. The little one trembled, not from the night's chill, but from the weight of something she could not name. The university loomed before them, silent yet watchful. Its towers tilted at angles that defied reason, its windows shifting as the family approached, as though the building were choosing which rooms would be visible, which corridors it would allow them to glimpse. Some windows revealed soft, golden light, flickering like candles, while others showed nothing but blackness, a blackness so deep it appeared endless. The faceless driver did not follow them inside. He remained on the carriage seat, still as a statue, hat shadowing where his face should have been. Without a word, he lifted a hand, pointing once more toward the doors. The Leclercs obeyed. They stepped across the threshold. The doors swung open as though pulled by invisible hands. Inside stretched a grand hall lined with portraits. Yet the faces on the canvases had been scraped away, some gouged violently, others smeared into blankness, as though they had been erased deliberately. What remained were only bodies in strange gowns, hands clutching books, chalices, or unfamiliar instruments. The air was heavy with varnish, mildew, and something sharper, the scent of iron, almost metallic. Marie clutched her mother's hand tighter. "They do not want us here," she whispered. But Cecile knew better. The fear was not that they were unwanted. The terror was that they were needed. At the far end of the hall, a figure waited. A man, or something resembling one. He was dressed in black robes that trailed across the marble, his posture rigid, his skin pale as candle wax. His eyes were dark, but not like pupils, rather, like holes bored through paper. His voice, when it came, was smooth yet hollow. "Welcome, House of Leclerc," he said. "You are received." Henri forced his voice steady. "Who are you? What is this place? Why have we been brought here?" The figure tilted his head. "I am only the provost. The university speaks for itself." His lips did not quite match the words. At times, they moved too slowly, and other times, not at all, as if the sound did not originate from him. "You have been chosen, as every year one family is chosen. You will learn. You will serve. And in time you will graduate." The word graduate echoed unnaturally, lingering in the air long after it was spoken. Marie began to sob, her small frame shaking. Cecile hushed her, but the provost's gaze, if it could be called that, shifted toward the girl. His dark void-like eyes flickered briefly, and Marie fell silent, not from comfort, but from something colder, as though her fear had been drained from her. Henri stepped forward. "We will not stay." The provost's lips curved into a facsimile of a smile. "You misunderstand. The gates have closed. There is no leaving until your education is complete." He gestured, and the portraits along the hall seemed to shift. The smears of paint and gouged faces reformed, not into likenesses of strangers, but into faces the Leclercs recognized. Families they had known from town. Families who had vanished. The Carraways, the Duvalier, the Fonteneaus. Their features were gaunt, their eyes hollow, but unmistakable. Cecile gasped and clutched her chest. Henri staggered backward, but Lucien stepped closer, fascinated, whispering the names under his breath. The provost's smile widened slightly, as if pleased. "Your predecessors," he said softly. "They too resisted at first. They too came to learn. The candles lining the hall flared. The air grew dense, as though pressing against the family's lungs. Henri, driven by instinct, grabbed his wife and children and turned back toward the doors. But when he pushed, the wood did not move. He shoved harder, ramming his shoulder into the panels. They remained still. Not locked. Not barred. Simply immovable, as if they were part of the wall itself. Cecile screamed Henry's name, but he already knew. They were trapped. The provost's voice filled the hall again. Your rooms await. Each family is given quarters within the walls. From this night forth, the university is your only home. You will rise when the bells toll. You will dine when the feast is called. You will study when the lectures are given. All else is forbidden. Lucien's eyes gleamed with hunger. And what will we learn? The provost regarded him with something close to pride. The curriculum is older than scripture, boy. You will learn the tongue without breath, the numbers that divide time itself, the songs that silence light. He stepped forward. His robes dragged across the marble, leaving no sound. You will learn to see as the university sees. Henri pulled his family closer, fury replacing fear. We will not be part of this madness. The provost's hollow eyes shifted toward him. The gates are closed, he repeated. And in that instant, the Leclercs realized what every chosen family before them had learned: refusal was meaningless. The walls of the university seemed to breathe, the portraits shifting subtly as though watching. Somewhere deep within the building, a bell tolled, not the sound of bronze on iron, but something wetter, something that rang inside their skulls. The provost extended his arm toward a staircase winding into shadows. Come, he said. The university is waiting. Henri hesitated, every instinct screaming against stepping further into this nightmare. But as he turned toward the gates once more, he saw Marie's reflection in the iron, yet it was not her reflection. The girl in the meadow was pale, thin, her eyes hollow like the painted families in the portraits. Marie screamed and clung to her mother. Cecile whispered frantic prayers. Lucien, however, moved forward willingly, as if pulled by an unseen hand. And so, torn between the terror of what lay ahead and the impossibility of escape, the Leclercs followed the provost deeper into the university. The doors closed behind them once more, quietly, firmly, with the permanence of earth closing over a grave. The gates had closed themselves, and the university had claimed another family. Lessons in a language without breath. The staircase wound upward into the belly of the university, its steps worn smooth by countless feet that had come before. Yet no sound echoed from their shoes, no creak of wood, no whisper of stone. It was as if the walls swallowed every noise the family made, keeping their passage a secret even from themselves. The provost glided ahead, robes dragging noiselessly along the ground. He carried no lamp, but the walls glowed faintly with a sickly light that seemed to seep through the stone itself. The deeper they climbed, the more the air pressed down upon their lungs. Marie clung to Cecile, her breath shallow. Lucien, however, ascended with a disturbing eagerness, his hand brushing along the wall as though it hummed beneath his palm. At last they reached a hall lined with doors. Each door bore a single mark burned into the wood, not letters, but symbols the Leclercs had never seen. Some twisted like coiled serpents, others branched like trees, and a few seemed to shift as one looked at them, rearranging into new shapes. The provost gestured to 3 of the doors. These are your quarters. Rest when the bell allows. Do not wander the halls in the forbidden hour. Henri frowned. And when is that? The provost's expression did not change. You will know. Before Henri could question further, the provost turned to Lucien. His hollow eyes lingered on the boy, his lips curving slightly. Your lessons begin at dawn. The bells rang without warning. Henri woke with a start in the darkness of their quarters. The chamber was windowless, lit only by a faint glow seeping through the cracks in the walls. Cecile stirred beside him, clutching Marie close as though shielding her from a dream she could not shake. The bell did not clang like iron. It pulsed, low and resonant, like the slow heartbeat of something buried deep. The door to their quarters opened without a hand upon it. Lucien was already awake, He rose with uncanny calm, as though he had expected this moment. The provost stood in the threshold, flanked by figures in robes of gray. Their faces were not faceless, yet neither were they whole, skin smooth as wax where features should have been, eyes only faint impressions and pale masks of flesh. "The pupil comes," the provost intoned. "No!" Henri barked, leaping to his feet. "You will not take my son!" The provost tilted his head slightly, not in defiance but in quiet patience. "The university has already taken him. He has been claimed since the letter found your table." His gaze fell upon Lucien. "The curriculum chooses its vessel." To Henry's horror, Lucien stepped forward willingly. Cecile cried out, grasping for him, but Lucien pulled away. His face was alight not with fear, but with something sharper, anticipation. The provost extended a hand toward the corridor. Lucien followed. The classroom was unlike any place Lucien had seen. It was circular, its walls lined with shelves of books whose pages fluttered as though stirred by invisible winds. The air was thick with a sound that was not a sound, an unending murmur, a low hiss that seemed to vibrate from the stone itself. At the center stood a lectern carved from black wood, polished smooth, its surface inlaid with the serpent devouring its tail crest. Upon it lay a book. Its cover was bound in something leathery, yet not quite leather. Its pages were ashen gray, the ink glistening like fresh oil. Around the lectern sat rows of benches. On them, other figures gathered, students though not of this world. Some looked human, but their skin bore cracks that revealed darkness beneath. Others were thin, translucent, their bones visible through shifting flesh. They turned to watch Lucien with hollow stares, as if they too had once been chosen. The provost gestured for Lucien to sit. From the shadows, a voice began to speak. It did not belong to the provost. It did not belong to any figure in the room. It was everywhere, spilling from the walls, the books, the very air. It spoke in syllables that twisted the tongue, sounds not meant for human throats. Each word vibrated through Lucien's chest, rattling his bones. "Repeat," the provost commanded. Lucien opened his mouth. To his father's horror, the boy echoed the words with unnatural ease. His tongue shaped the impossible syllables, his lips forming sounds that carried no breath. It was a language without lungs, a language of silence given voice. Cecile had followed, despite Henry's protests, peering from the doorway. She clutched Marie to her chest, her body trembling as she watched her son speak the impossible. "Henri," she whispered, "it is teaching him." The provost turned sharply, as though he had heard her whisper despite the distance. "It is not teaching him," he said. "It is awakening him." Lucien's eyes widened. His voice deepened. The sounds he repeated filled the room like waves crashing against stone. The other students bent low, trembling, as though in reverence. The book upon the lectern quivered, its pages fluttering. When Lucien stopped, the silence was heavier than any sound. The provost stepped forward. His waxen face leaned close to Lucien's ear. "You will learn the words that bind shadows. You will learn the script that carves memory. And when you are ready, you will write your family's name into the book." Henri pushed into the room, fury in his voice. "Leave my son be!" The provost raised his hand. Henry's body froze mid-step, his muscles locked. He gasped, struggling against an invisible weight that pressed down upon him. Cecile screamed, clutching Marie tighter. Lucien looked at his father, but his expression had changed. His eyes glowed faintly, as though lit from within, and when he spoke, it was not with the boy's voice. "Father," he said, "I can see what you cannot. The words, they are alive. They crawl, they breathe, they remember." Henri strained against the force holding him still. "They will kill you, Lucien. Whatever this place is, it will consume you." But Lucien only smiled. "Then let it. For the first time, I feel chosen." The days blurred. Each dawn, the bells tolled. Each day, Lucien was taken to the classroom, where he learned the forbidden language. At first, it was repetition. Then it became writing, symbols carved into stone with tools of bone, ink mixed with something darker than blood. He wrote words that twisted on the page, words that refused to stay still, shifting whenever one blinked. The more he learned, the more his body changed. His skin grew pale, his voice resonant with an echo that lingered after he spoke. His breath became shallow, until one evening Cecile pressed her ear to his chest and sobbed, because though her son still lived, his lungs no longer rose and fell. Lucien had learned the language without breath. Henri grew desperate. He tried to flee the quarters at night, but every corridor bent back upon itself. He tried to scratch through the walls, but the stone bled black fluid when struck. He even tried to steal the book from the lectern, but the moment his hand touched it, screams filled his head, voices of countless others who had tried and failed. And all the while, the university whispered. In the silence of their chambers, Cecile sometimes heard Lucien's voice, though he was not there. Words without air, crawling into her mind like insects. Marie cried in her sleep, her lips moving to syllables she had never been taught. It was not only Lucien being taught. It was the whole family. On the 7th day, the provost summoned them all. They stood once more in the classroom, the book open upon the lectern. The provost's voice carried like thunder. Every family chosen must bind itself. Every name must be written. Every shadow must be given over. Henri shook his head violently. No. You will not have us. But Lucien stepped forward, hand reaching for the ink. His voice, no longer his own, spoke with certainty. It is already written, father. The symbols on the page twisted. Henri saw the letters of their name forming, not in ink, but in shadow, as though their very lives were being drained onto the parchment. Cecile screamed. Marie collapsed. Henri lunged to stop his son, but the provost's hollow eyes gleamed, and the book turned another page. The library that erased names. The book closed with a sound that was not a sound. The moment the page turned, Henri felt something wrenched from him, something invisible yet vital. A weight pressed against his chest, and for a fleeting second, he could not remember the name of his own father. The memory slipped like water through his fingers, leaving only the ache of absence. Cecile clutched Marie, sobbing into the child's hair, while Lucien stood at the lectern, his hand still resting upon the blackened page. His expression was unreadable, his eyes glowing faintly, as if whatever had spoken through him lingered still. The provost regarded them with that waxen half-smile. The university has accepted you. The first shadow has been bound. Henri spat the words like venom. You speak of shadows as though they are coin. What are you taking from us? The provost did not answer. Instead, he turned toward a narrow stairwell leading downward, into a depth that breathed cold into the air. You will understand, he said softly. The library awaits. The staircase was steep, hewn from stones slick with moisture. Torches burned along the walls, but their flames did not flicker. They held still, frozen, as though trapped within glass. The Leclercs descended, their footsteps echoing softly, though each echo seemed delayed, as if another set of unseen feet followed a breath behind. Marie whispered, I do not want to see what is waiting. Henri pulled her close. Nor do I, he said. But still, they followed. At the bottom stretched a vast chamber. Its ceiling vanished into shadow, its floor lined with endless rows of shelves. Books, scrolls, ledgers, and tablets stretched farther than sight allowed, a sea of records bound in materials no paper mill had ever known. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of mold and iron. And there was sound, faint at first, then unmistakable. The shelves whispered. Not like wind, not like leaves, but like countless voices speaking at once, murmuring words too faint to grasp. Cecile shivered. This is not a library. It is a grave. The provost led them down an aisle. As they passed, Henri noticed that many of the books bore no titles. Some covers were blank, others scarred with claw-like marks. A few seemed to pulse faintly, as though veins ran beneath their bindings. At last, the provost stopped before a massive ledger, resting open upon a pedestal of bone. Its pages glowed faintly, ink glimmering with an oily sheen. He gestured toward it. This is the register. Every family chosen is recorded here. Every name, every line, every generation bound to the university. Henri stepped forward despite himself. The open page bore names he recognized: Caraway, Duvalier, Fontenot. Each was written in crisp, elegant script. Yet as he watched, the ink began to fade. The letters blurred, dissolved, until only faint smudges remained. Within moments, the names were gone, as though they had never been written at all. "No," Cecile whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, I knew the Caraways. I knew their children. They lived near Opelousas. They were real." But the page was blank. Marie whimpered. "If the names vanish, do they vanish too?" The provost's empty eyes shifted toward the child. "Those who are chosen cease to exist in the memory of the world. The living will speak their names for a time, but the university erases. It erases cleanly, completely. In the end, only the university remembers." Henry's fists tightened until his nails cut his palms. "You mean you devour them? You take their lives, their shadows, and you erase them from history?" The provost inclined his head slightly. "History is a fragile thing. We preserve what we must. We consume what we must." Lucien stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the ledger with a strange hunger. "And what becomes of those whose names remain?" The provost regarded him for a long moment. "They are the ones who graduate." The word struck like a knife. Henri remembered the echo of it from the provost's first welcome, the way it had lingered unnaturally in the air. "What does it mean?" he demanded. But the provost turned away, leading them deeper into the shelves. The further they went, the louder the whispers grew. The shelves seemed endless, bending subtly as though the library shifted itself to guide or confine them. At times, Henri swore the books leaned closer, as if straining to listen, their spines cracking softly like joints. They came to a section where the shelves grew warped, wood twisted into grotesque shapes. The books here did not whisper, they wept. Pages stained with moisture, ink bleeding down their covers like tears. Marie reached out toward one before Henri caught her hand. But the book pulsed violently at her nearness, and with a sound like a gasp, its cover opened of its own accord. The page inside bore a name, Henri Leclerc. Henri staggered back, his heart lurching. "No, that cannot be." The provost's voice was calm. "The moment the carriage claimed you, the library began to write. Your name is recorded here, as is your wife's, your son's, your daughter's. The ink is still wet." Cecile fell to her knees, clutching Marie. "Then erase it. Take it back. We did not choose this." The provost regarded her with something like pity, though his face was too inhuman for the emotion to ring true. "The library does not record choice. Only fact." Henry's fury overtook his fear. He lunged at the ledger, tearing at the page with his bare hands. The parchment resisted like flesh. Black fluid seeped across his fingers, thick and warm. The moment it touched his skin, voices screamed in his ears. Hundreds, thousands of voices shrieking in agony. He reeled back, clutching his head. The book closed itself with a snap. Lucien's voice broke the silence. He had not moved to help, had not even flinched. His eyes glowed faintly in the torchlight as he whispered, "It does not matter, Father. Once written, it cannot be undone. The library will take us all." Henri turned on him, rage and desperation spilling from his voice. "You are still my son. You are not theirs." Lucien looked at him, calm, alien, unblinking. "I am becoming what I was meant to be." The provost gestured to another shelf. The Leclercs followed reluctantly, and before them rose volumes bound in unfamiliar skins. Each bore the same crest, the open book and the serpent devouring its tail. "These," the provost said softly, "are the curricula. Each family learns its own volume. Each family completes its own scripture. When the last page is read, the name vanishes." Henri stared at the endless shelves. "And when the last page is read, what is left of them?" The provost did not answer. Instead, he reached for one of the volumes. It shuddered in his grasp, as if reluctant. He opened it, revealing pages filled not with words, but with darkness, shifting shapes that crawled like insects across the parchment. "This is what you will study next," he said. "The library keeps its silence only until it is read aloud. Once spoken, the words bind forever." Marie buried her face against her mother's shoulder, trembling. Cecile wept openly, her voice breaking. "Henri, we must escape. We cannot let this place take us." But Henri knew escape was a lie. The gates had closed. The library had written their names. Already he could feel the edges of memory fraying, as though the world outside was forgetting him. He imagined their neighbors waking tomorrow and failing to recall the Leclercs at all. He imagined their land lying empty, their home abandoned, their names unspoken. And for the first time, he felt the crushing certainty that they were no longer part of Louisiana, no longer part of the world of the living. They belonged to the university now, and the library would erase them. The feast no one left hungry from. The bells rang at dusk, a sound so low and resonant that the very windows of the university shuddered in their frames. The students, the chosen family of that year, had not heard bells before. Not here. The faculty never rang them for classes, nor for prayer, nor for any ceremony. Their silence had always been one of the many mysteries that cloaked the campus. And yet tonight, the bells tolled, and the echoes carried with them a dreadful summons. Petroleum lamps flickered along the main corridors, their light dim and jaundiced, illuminating only enough to suggest more shadows than brightness. A parchment slid beneath the chamber doors of the family members, announced only 3 words in a cramped, quivering hand. To the feast. The father, stern and tired of secrecy, declared they would go together. The mother whispered of unease, for she had dreamt all week of tables without food and plates without end. The children said nothing. They merely dressed as if for church, quiet as sleepwalkers, their movements guided by something other than choice. The dining hall lay at the heart of the university. Its doors were iron, engraved with vines that did not match any earthly plant. As the family approached, those doors creaked open without hand or key. The professors stood within, already robed, their faces slack with a hunger that was not entirely human. Long tables stretched from wall to wall, each covered in white cloth that bore no wrinkle, no fold. Silver plates gleamed, yet not a morsel of food was visible. The family hesitated. It was only when they took their seats that the headmaster raised his hand, and the lamps along the hall sputtered out, leaving only the faint light of candles, each flame burning black instead of gold. And then the feast began. The plates filled on their own, steaming dishes appearing in silence, roasted fowl glistening with dark glaze, loaves of bread that seemed to breathe faintly as though alive, fruits that bled when cut, and wines that poured themselves into the waiting goblets. The smell was intoxicating, both sweet and foul, like sugar rotting in the sun. The professors ate first, tearing into their meals with ferocity. But the sounds were strange, not the chewing of flesh, but the muffled tearing of paper, the wet ripping of books being devoured. The family froze as they realized what was upon their own plates was not flesh at all, but text, cooked pages bound with veins, sentences grilled until the ink smoked, paragraphs laid out like cuts of meat. They had been served knowledge itself. The father tried to push the plate away, but his hands would not obey. His fingers lifted the fork as though commanded by another, spearing a sentence, raising it to his mouth. The taste was indescribable, not sweet, not bitter, but filling, a rush of understanding that pressed against his skull until it throbbed. He swallowed, and in that instant, he knew the shape of a city that no longer existed, a city erased from maps and minds alike. The mother wept as she chewed. Her tongue formed syllables she had never learned, languages without breath or vowels, sounds that cut at the air like knives. She tried to stop, but every bite seemed to silence her resistance, until only the words of the forbidden tongue tumbled from her lips. The children ate in silence. The boy chewed a passage that taught him of numbers that could not be counted. His eyes rolled back, and he began to mutter equations that bent the candle's flames. The girl nibbled on a verse that revealed the names of things that had no shape, and she began to laugh, the sound thin and hollow, echoing off the high ceiling like broken glass. No one left hungry. That was the promise, and it was true. The food, the knowledge, consumed them as much as they consumed it. With every bite, their faces seemed to blur, their names slipping away like spilled ink. By the time the father looked across the table at his wife, he could no longer recall the word by which he had always called her. At the head of the table, the headmaster rose. He lifted his goblet, which held no wine but a thick black liquid that quivered like tar. "Tonight," he said, voice low and heavy, "you join not a school, but a covenant. You are fed so that you may be unmade, and unmade so that you may be fed. No one leaves this table hungry, for hunger is the bond that binds us." The family wanted to protest, but their mouths were too full of the text they had been forced to eat. Their stomachs swelled, their eyes widened, and knowledge leaked from their very pores. The girl began to draw on the table with her own blood, her finger tracing letters in a script older than Louisiana itself. The boy choked, but when he opened his mouth, instead of vomit, a scroll unrolled, ink dripping from its edges. The mother's hair whitened in moments, her face lined with cracks as if she were a porcelain doll. She whispered to her husband, "We are being written," before her lips sealed themselves into silence. The professors did not watch with pity but with satisfaction, their own plates piled high with the remnants of families who had come before. For in truth, the feast was not a celebration, nor even a test. It was a binding ritual, a way to hollow out the chosen and prepare them to join the shelves of the library that erased names. Each family was a new chapter, swallowed by the university's hunger. The final course arrived, a single, small, untouched book set before each family member. Its cover was blank, its pages empty. The headmaster spoke again, his voice now resembling the scraping of stone on stone. "Write what remains of you. Write quickly. For once the candles gutter out, the university will take what you have not given." The father tried to inscribe his name, but the letters dissolved as he wrote them, vanishing into the paper. The mother attempted to write her children's faces, sketching them with desperate strokes. But the page absorbed the ink and left only shadows. The children scribbled nonsense, the boy drawing endless numbers, the girl writing only the sound of her laughter. When the candles finally died, their books snapped shut, sealing their fragments forever. The family slumped forward, their bodies still at the table, but their essence gone, taken into the feast, into the shelves, into the university itself. The professors rose, sated, their faces glistening with the satisfaction of another ritual completed. The plates vanished, the tables reset themselves, the black candles flared to life once more. The headmaster raised his goblet a final time. "No one leaves hungry," he whispered. And as his words faded, the family seats were already empty, their existence smoothed away like chalk from a slate. In the corridors outside, the bells rang once more, calling the next year's silence into being. The walls that remembered voices. The feast had ended, though the echoes of its strange conclusion clung to every corner of the great hall. Plates had been cleared, goblets drained, and the velvet curtains drawn across tall windows to conceal the bruised sky outside. Yet for the surviving Beaumonts, what remained of them, the silence afterward was heavier than the cacophony of cutlery and whispered toasts. Silence was not an emptiness here. It was crowded, breathing, close. And it was in that silence that Petronelle Beaumont, the last daughter of her line, first heard the walls murmur. It began as a sound mistaken for wind, brushing lightly across the stone columns in the corridor. But Louisiana wind carried with it the familiar perfume of bayou rot, the whine of cicadas, the wet promise of storm. This was not that. This was syllables half-formed, words too frail to carry a breath, pressed into the mortar by generations of mouths. She stopped walking. Her brother had vanished 2 nights before, her mother at the feast itself. Her father, silent since the invitation arrived, spoke now only in blank stares. Alone in the corridor, Petronelle placed her palm to the wall. The stones throbbed faintly beneath her touch, warm as if from recent breath. "Help us!" a voice whispered, drawn so thin it barely survived the crossing from one side of stone to the other. Petronelle's hand recoiled. The corridor looked the same, iron sconces burning low, portraits of nameless graduates who had never graduated staring down with resigned eyes. Yet the sensation lingered, crawling up her fingers like spider silk. She pressed her ear to the stone. "You must leave!" It was a man's voice, cracked and strained. But before she could call back, another voice rose, a child's laugh, brittle as glass. Then another, deeper, chanting syllables she had glimpsed only in the textbooks of the forbidden curriculum. The walls were not walls. They were repositories, swallowing names, voices, and memories as payment for knowledge never meant for human minds. That night, she could not sleep. The beds in their assigned quarters were narrow, the windows sealed, the moonlight denied. Each time she closed her eyes, the sound of stone exhaling returned. She dreamed of bricks sliding out of place to reveal mouths where mortar should have been, lips cracked with lime, whispering lessons until her own tongue split to keep pace. By morning, she was resolved to know more. The headmaster awaited her. His long figure, as gaunt as the candelabra he leaned against, beckoned her toward the lower floors. "You have heard them, then?" he said. It was not a question, but a statement so certain it chilled her. Petronelle faltered. "Who?" "The walls," he replied simply, as if announcing the sky. "Every family does. Some later, some sooner. They remember all that has passed here. All that has been fed to them. It is not memory as you understand it. It is hunger given permanence." She nearly refused his invitation to follow, but refusal in this place had already proven impossible. The university had chosen them. Refusal was as forbidden as ignorance. The descent wound downward through staircases carved in damp stone. Torches lit their path, but the deeper they went, the less flame seemed to matter. The air itself began to glow faintly, as if walls soaked in memory had developed their own phosphorescence. And with the glow came the voices, multitudes now, rising in waves, men and women speaking over each other in overlapping streams of desperation, prayer, and unfinished sentences. "Listen closely," the headmaster whispered, placing his palm to the wall. His long fingers pressed into the limestone as if the stone were soft. "What you hear are not ghosts. Ghosts die with their bodies. These are impressions, residues. They cannot be buried, for they are not dead." Petronelle tried to focus on a single strand of voice. For a moment, she caught one, a woman repeating the Lord's Prayer. But halfway through, the prayer warped, the words bending into the same breathless, alien syllables she had been forced to learn in class. The prayer ended not with amen, but with a hiss that made her teeth ache. She staggered back. Why does the university keep them here?" The headmaster's eyes gleamed. "Because the stone does what flesh cannot. It remembers without end. The families vanish, yes, but their contribution remains. They do not graduate in life. They graduate into the walls." The torch sputtered. The walls roared. Petronelle's hand trembled as she clutched the iron railing, her pulse a drumbeat against the silence between voices. Days blurred after that. Wherever she went, the whispers followed. During lessons, when she traced lines of text in that impossible script, she heard former students repeating them slightly ahead, guiding her as though their study had never ceased. In the dining hall, as she tried to swallow the black bread and bitter wine, she heard chewing behind the stones, as though invisible mouths feasted alongside her. And at night, when she whispered her own name to remind herself she still existed, the walls whispered it back, but altered, syllables reversed or broken, as if even her name was already being reworked into the archive. Petronelle began to mark her days by the intensity of the walls' hunger. Sometimes they whispered faintly, like distant storms. Sometimes they shouted, and the pressure of their voices rattled the sconces and made her ears bleed. The headmaster said nothing of this. The tutors ignored it. Her father, by then, had surrendered entirely, sitting mute in the corner, rocking gently as though soothed by the chorus. She was left alone to interpret the voices, and to resist them. One evening, unable to endure the suffocating quarters, Petronelle wandered the halls. She found herself before a section of wall darker than the rest, as though the stone itself had thickened with an excess of voices. She pressed her palm against it. It pulsed faintly, and then she recognized the voice. "Petronelle," it whispered. Her heart froze. It was her brother's. The brother who had vanished 2 nights before, whose absence had been explained by tutors as a necessary removal. His voice was distorted, hollow, but unmistakable. "Do not follow," he pleaded. "Do not let them take your name. Once it is gone, you are not even gone. You are only theirs." She wept then, silently, pressed against the wall while her brother's voice dissolved into the chorus. For the first time, she understood the purpose of the library, the feast, the curriculum. The university was not teaching them to become scholars. It was teaching them to become language itself, syllables etched into the architecture, forever repeating lessons to those still trapped within. No one graduated because no one left. The families became the mortar, the whisper, the stone. The following morning, when the bell tolled for study, Petronelle refused to attend. The tutors arrived at her quarters, their faces pallid and expressionless. They did not scold. They merely took her hands and led her back into the depths, to the chamber where the voices were loudest. The headmaster was waiting. "You resist," he said softly, almost admiringly. "That is good. Resistance gives the walls something to feed on. It makes the impression stronger." Petronelle screamed, though her voice was drowned instantly by the walls echoing her cry, multiplying it until it was indistinguishable from the thousands already stored. Her scream no longer belonged to her. The walls had remembered it. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized something terrible. Her brother had begged her not to follow. But she already had. Each word she spoke, each prayer she mouthed, each syllable of the alien tongue she forced herself to recite, it all slid into the stone, seeping deeper than her flesh could carry. Her name had already begun to erode. When she whispered Petronelle into the dark, the walls answered back, not as an echo, but as a correction. "Petronelle." And once they corrected you, there was no going back. The final graduation. The night of the ceremony was heavy with a silence that did not belong to any living place. Even the cicadas, those eternal voices of Louisiana dusk, had fallen quiet. A pale lantern light flickered across the central hall of the university, summoning the Petros family to what the faculty called commencement. But nothing about that word sounded like freedom. Nothing about the long, vaulted chamber suggested celebration. The walls themselves had begun to sweat with voices. Since the feast, since the walls had echoed with remembered screams, Etienne and his daughter Lucille had not known rest. Every corridor spoke. Every window, when approached, showed not the courtyard but reflections of past families, stiff collars, long dresses, faces dissolving into chalky blurs. And now, at last, the invitation had arrived, not in the mail, not by hand, but whispered from the mouth of the very stairwell that led to the upper floor. Graduation. It had sighed, its voice both his father's and his son's. They entered the hall as one: Etienne, his wife Marguerite, Lucille clutching the folds of her mother's skirt. Along the length of the chamber stretched a long table, its surface draped in parchment instead of cloth, covered with ink stains that bled like veins. Faculty figures stood along the edges, their faces half concealed in shadow, their robes heavy as drapery. No chair was empty, no breath wasted. At the far end waited the chancellor. He was not a man in the ordinary sense, though he still wore the borrowed shape of one, gaunt, academic, parchment-skinned. His eyes were sunk too deep, as though they had retreated into a tunnel, and his smile bore more teeth than the mouth should hold. In his hands lay a scroll bound with black ribbon. "Petros family," he announced, voice like chalk scraped across stone. "Your years of instruction are at an end. The time has come to graduate." Etienne wanted to protest, to ask how long they had been here. Days? Weeks? Entire seasons? Time had been gutted inside these walls. He remembered the invitation letter arriving, remembered stepping through the gates in 1859. Beyond that, only fragments. Lucille learning a language that tasted like iron when she spoke it, Marguerite weeping when her reflection in the mirror showed a stranger. Now the walls whispered in chorus, "None ever leave. None ever leave." The chancellor raised the scroll, and with that gesture the table came alive. The parchment-draped surface rippled as though liquid moved beneath it. Ink stains widened, blooming outward, until the entire table seemed like a map of veins feeding toward a central point. Graduation, the Chancellor continued, is not the end of learning. It is the offering of what has been learned back to the source. One faculty member stepped forward, but lowered. It was the professor of languages, the one who had taught Lucille words without breath. She unrolled a slim ledger and began to read, not aloud in English, but in that language of strangled syllables, tones that bent the ear inside out. Each word landed like a hammer inside Etienne's skull. Lucille's lips began to move in unison. She had no choice. The lessons had written themselves into her marrow. Her voice joined the professor's, producing sounds that made the lantern light flicker backwards, as though fire itself sought to retreat. The parchment table split open. From within rose not food, nor books, nor trophies of achievement, but human figures. Shimmering, hollow as if pressed from wax. Etienne recognized them, even through distortion, the families before them. Men, women, children. They did not stand in joy but in collapse, bent double, mouths forever open in a silent cry. Their hands clawed at invisible ropes binding them. The Chancellor gestured toward them with ceremonial grace. Graduation means you join the lineage, he explained. You are not the first Petros to enter, but you shall be the last. Your voices will fuel the halls. Your shadows will guard the texts. Your names will dissolve from the earth. Marguerite gasped, shaking her head. We will not. The Chancellor's smile spread wider. You already have. He turned the scroll. Etienne could read it even from a distance. His family's names were written there, but each was unraveling letter by letter, vanishing before his eyes. Etienne Petros, reduced to faint scratches. Marguerite, erased as though water washed her away. Lucille's name burned longest, but even now the final E trembled at the edge of extinction. The voices of the walls began to converge, chanting in 1,000 overlapping tones, "Join us! Join us! Join us!" Etienne felt his knees weaken. Marguerite clutched his arm. Lucille looked up at him, eyes hollow with dread yet lit by defiance. "Papa," she whispered, "what if graduation means death?" He shook his head. "No. It is worse. It means to live here forever." He could feel it happening already. His skin itched with the memory of voices not his own. Every breath brought dust, the dust of past families, swirling down his throat. The Chancellor lifted his hands. "Commence." The faculty began to chant. Lucille's lips moved again, unwillingly. The hollow figures of the former families lurched forward, stretching their arms toward the Petros. The parchment table yawned wider, revealing beneath it not wood nor stone, but a pit filled with letters and names, millions of them, swirling like ashes in a storm. Etienne felt his feet sliding forward without command. Marguerite screamed as her hands slipped from his. The pull was not physical. It was the erasure of choice itself, the rewriting of will into obedience. Graduation was submission. Lucille clutched her father's sleeve, tears streaking her face. "We cannot let them take us." Etienne, through sheer will, wrenched his head upward and shouted, though the word he chose was not his own. It was one of the words without breath, one he had forbidden Lucille from ever repeating. Yet he spoke it now, a word that tasted like burning salt. The hall shook. The hollow figures faltered. For a moment, the parchment rippled like disturbed water. The Chancellor narrowed his abyssal eyes. "You cannot speak what you do not understand." But Etienne understood enough. He had learned, against his will, that the language itself was a weapon, and perhaps, if spoken wrongly, a wound. Lucille's courage rose. She too shouted a word, one she had whispered in nightmares but never dared aloud. The lanterns burst, raining sparks. The walls screamed in 1,000 overlapping voices, not chants now, but agony. Marguerite collapsed, covering her ears. The Chancellor snarled, teeth multiplying like shards of glass. "Graduation is eternal. You cannot refuse." Etienne and Lucille shouted again, different words this time, fragments of the forbidden lexicon. The parchment split further. Instead of drawing them in, the rift began to collapse upon itself, sucking backward. The hollow families wailed, dragged screaming into the pit of names. Faculty's shadows flickered and dissolved like ash in a storm. The Chancellor lunged, his form elongating, arms stretching unnaturally long. But the words, those cursed alien words, tore his shape apart. His mouth widened into a perfect circle of teeth before imploding into nothing. The hall trembled. The roof cracked. The very foundation of the university groaned as if dragged into its own grave. When the noise fell silent, Etienne opened his eyes. He stood not in the hall but in the courtyard, under the pale moonlight of Louisiana night. Marguerite lay beside him, trembling but alive. Lucille clung to his arm. Behind them, the university tower loomed, but it was different. Windows shattered. Walls collapsed inward. The gates, once locked, now swung wide as though they had never known chains. They stumbled out, beyond the iron fence, into the dirt road. For the first time in what felt like centuries, Etienne tasted air without dust. Lucille turned back. "Papa, what happens now?" He looked at her, unable to answer. For on the road behind them, where their shadows should have stretched long in the moonlight, there were none. The shadows had not followed. Or worse, perhaps the university still held them. The following week, townsfolk discovered the ruins. They whispered of collapse, of a fire no one had seen. No record of the Petros family remained in parish archives. When asked, neighbors swore they had never known such a name. And yet, when children passed the broken gates, they swore the walls still whispered, softly, almost kindly, one word: graduate.